Hello everyone, I'm really excited to be here. As Aura said, my name is Ernest Britt. A little bit about me, I am a digital storyteller and digital organizer, and I currently work at Color of Change as a senior campaign manager working on issues related to criminal justice and democracy. A little bit about Color of Change. So Color of Change is the largest online racial justice organization in the United States, with over 7 million active members who have taken action with us in the last year. I can jump into this topic, but obviously building influence is a key part of how Color of Change operates, how we win change, how we demand it, and how we push forward in the fight for racial justice. So starting with the basics, what is influence? What is power? I don't want to go too philosophical here, and many others have talked about this in previous presentations, but from my view, I like to use Martin Luther King Jr.'s definition of power. He described power as the ability to achieve purpose, adding whether it is good or bad depends on the purpose. So to break that down, we all require resources to achieve our purposes. It's a question of what we have to get what we want, but few, if any of us, control all of the resources we need to achieve all of our purposes and interests. So, to break this down further, this is a quote from a professor at Harvard named Marshall Gans, who is very influential in organizing work and how we think about social justice movements. But he has stated, "Power is not a thing, quality, or trait. It is the influence created by the relationship between interests and resources." So the larger question that I pose and the larger question that Color of Change considers is, how are we building influence? How are we leveraging influence to demand change and to make change real? And I want to quickly point out that this is an image from the 1968 Civil Rights Movement in the United States. Of course, when you think of traditional organizing, you may think of protests, bus boycotts, etc. That is obviously still a key component of racial justice organizing, but with the advent of digital and social media, accessibility has expanded and we are able to organize on a much larger scale. Cool, so in racial justice organizing, again, influence, people power can be leveraged to demand and win meaningful change. And when I say meaningful change, of course, we're talking about protecting voting rights, fighting for climate justice, working to dismantle systems of mass incarceration, to move beyond policing, to create safety for every community and every person. It means fighting for the resources we need to achieve the purpose we want. So when it comes to influence, this is the same whether we're talking about blockchain or journalism. This is all about trust. So I've broken it down into 3 components. To build influence, you have to earn trust. You have to have an audience that respects you, that listens to you, and that values your insight. Second, you have to maintain trust. Racial justice organizing, social justice organizing, these are long-term fights. These aren't, changes are made overnight. It takes months and weeks and years of real action, so you have to maintain that trust and that relationship. And third, which is very important, is building and growing a powerful network. We're not building a network just for the sake of building a network. We are building a network that can actually affect change and demand power in meaningful ways. So again, earning trust for me and at Color of Change, it means showing up, speaking up, and following up. And there's a couple questions that you may ask. How and where can my organization add value? What is the specific issue area that I'm an expert in that I can become involved in and to help promote? But at the same time, you have to be humble and consider who else is already doing this work. There are plenty of organizations, plenty of activists across the world who are actively engaging in a full range of issues, who may be the experts, who you might want to defer to or connect with when you're doing this work. But a much bigger question is, how can my organization support them or amplify their message? We never want to be parachuting into a situation, pretending that we're the experts and the leaders, when there is a history of people taking action on these issues. And then speaking up. developing a unique, trustworthy, and consistent voice. So when I say consistent voice, I'm talking about how your organization shows up online, how you talk about certain issues, how you relate to people and engage with your audience. Is it consistent? Is it worth people giving up their time, their resources to support you? And is it unique? Are you just repeating what every other org is saying, what every other NGO is promoting, or are you actually adding something to the mission, to the conversation? And finally, rapid response strategy is a key component. So when I think of rapid response, I'm talking about a crisis happens, a situation takes place. Is your org ready to step in and to make a comment about it, to get people to take action? Are you nimble? Are you strategic in those moments? And then going a little deeper, earning trust is more than just showing up when it's easy or when the issue is popular or well known. Kate mentioned earlier how a lot of corporations kind of jumped into the Black Lives Matter movement when it was popular, when it was trending. That's not what movement building is. It's about engaging for the long haul. It's about shining a light on an unknown or hyperlocal story and staying involved, either behind the scenes or publicly, for weeks, months, even years. And then following up, this is critical. So sticking around long after the buzz, long after the trending hashtag dies down. We're thinking about developing specific calls to action, or CTAs. This is the actions that we present to our members to take the next step. Something happens, call your senator, share this petition, take action and join us at this phone bank, or whatever the case may be. You want to give people something to do with that energy. And that's basically how trust and engagement is maintained. Of course, it's a lot deeper, and I could go on and on and on, but that's, in my mind, the key components. Maintaining trust. So again, this is showing up consistently and authentically, developing issue expertise. This is critical in social justice, building relationships with organizers, impacted communities, decision makers, and staying in touch before, during, and after the crisis. And then building an engaged audience or following that both values your organization's perspective and feels empowered to act. It's one thing to release press advisories, comments, statements. It's another thing entirely to actively engage your audience and mobilize them to take an action to affect change. And then number 3, building and growing a powerful network. So this looks like connecting with trusted surrogates and partners. This is being proactive, reaching out to any of the players in this game, decision makers, partners, funders, media, as soon as a crisis emerges. And then last, but certainly not least, and I'll go into this much deeper in a moment, engaging influencers and media partners. So which relationships are important and appropriate to leverage in whatever moment you're in, and who is an influencer on this particular issue. So if you're thinking about voting rights, who is an influencer in that space? You could think of like a Stacey Abrams or someone else who is organizing in the US around voting rights. You could think of a celebrity who has spoken about the issue or cares deeply about it. It just depends on what your strategic vision is and who you think would be most impactful as a partner. And then, of course, these days anyone can be an influencer. You don't have to be a Kardashian, you don't have to be a famous person, whatever that means now. Anyone can use their platform of choice and their unique point of view to shine a light on the racial and social justice issues that matter to them. And TikTok is a great example, and I'm going to go a little bit deeper into what that looks like. So before I enter this case study, I have 2 quick questions for the audience. Raise your hand if you are familiar with, if you've heard of the police murder of George Floyd. It's every single person in the room. For those watching virtually, thank you. Raise your hand if you've heard of the police murder of Daniel Prude. It's like 7, 8, okay. Not as many people. And this is exactly the sort of issue where color change gets involved. Of course, the murder of George Floyd in Minnesota became an international story. But Color of Change, as a US-based national organization, we want to highlight and shine a light on police brutality wherever it is, because it's not just a local issue. This is a systemic issue, it's a cultural issue. There's a lot of areas that need to be dismantled to make it right. So very quickly, actually a couple months before George Floyd was murdered, the Rochester police in Rochester, New York, murdered Daniel Prude. He was a black man experiencing a mental health crisis. Didn't do anything wrong. His family called 911 to get a ambulance or a medical technician to help, and the police showed up and they basically choked him to death. The video was released in September, so several months later, after the mayor and the police chief attempted to basically cover it up. So as soon as we heard about this issue, Color of Change, of course, wanted to talk about it and to inform people about this other case that is terrible and equally as egregious, and just a part of highlighting this systemic problem. So a part of what we did to amplify this story is, let me click to the next. We worked with a creative firm called Big Tent Creative, now called Get Vocal. And what they do is they work with influencers, usually black and brown, younger influencers, TikTokers, creators, to promote campaigns for racial justice, for electoral politics, whatever the case may be. So we worked with them to identify 9 black creators under 35. They were from 7 states, including 2 from New York, which obviously Rochester is in New York, so that was an important connection. We provided them with all the information about the case, about the story, and then the various calls to action. So demanding reform from city officials, demanding a Department of Justice investigation into Rochester, and so on. It's quite a bit. But it was great. It worked really, really well. You can see here, and I'm about to play a video, but we had 9 influencers who published 9 TikTok videos. The campaign resulted in 130 video messages submitted through Color of Change's Your Voice platform, a cost of engagement of 2 cents, nearly 700,000 views, and nearly 500,000 engagements on TikTok, so likes, comments, and shares. Each video received an average of 75,000 views, on and on and on. But this is an example of, oh, it says unable to play video. That's unfortunate. Anyway, I can describe what took place. Basically, it was, should I go back? Okay, let me see. Sorry, I'll let you click. It's okay. Basically, this was just an example of one of the TikToks that was put out. It's a young woman, a black woman who is an influencer on TikTok, talking about the issue and describing ways for her followers to get involved. It was about a minute long. She distilled the information really succinctly, using the phrasing and the description that her audience can understand. And we found that hearing directly from the people you're already engaging with online is much more impactful, much more inspiring, much more mobilizing. They trust this person to give them information. They knew of Color of Change and trusted us based on our online presence and influence, and they showed up. They demanded action, they made calls, they submitted videos, and so on. It's not. Cool. Great. So this is more of the results of the case study on TikTok. We found that creators are hungry for ways to support racial justice work, and so is their audience. People, especially after the murder of George Floyd, young people in particular, they want to take action. They want to speak up on these issues. They want to know what's happening in the world, and they want to change it. So we found that creators and audiences alike were ready to act in support of the campaign. Again, we reached 674,000 views. This was back in April, so I'm sure the numbers are way up. And nearly 500,000 total engagements through the voices of young black creators. And another big benefit for us is that instead of paying a Facebook, a Google, Snapchat, whatever, for digital ads, we paid black creators to make content for us. So it's a lot cheaper. We're not supporting, giant tech corporations that have problematic histories with these issues. We're supporting people who are directly impacted, who have family in Rochester, who have connections to the issue, and so on. So, last slide before questions. Building influence in racial and social justice, obviously there's a lot to unpack. But one thing that I've had to remember is to always acknowledge even the smallest victories and wins, because it's hard. It's not easy to do this work, especially in the US, especially right now. I think there's this assumption that, post Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement and the Equality Act and all of these different things, that there's great progress and that the fight is over. That's not the case, as is quite obvious. But we always want to uplift every victory and connect those small wins to the larger continued fight. And last but not least, building influence is a process. And leveraging that influence to create real change is a process. This isn't an overnight thing. We're still fighting for justice for George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We're still fighting for victory or for justice in Rochester, New York. So yes, we want to acknowledge progress. We want to acknowledge victories and wins, but we also have to be realistic about what our influence can actually create. So that is it. That's a great question. It will persist if we hold them accountable and demand it. The media follows, in many cases, the media follows what we follow, what we care about, what their readers are talking about, what their listeners are talking about, and so on. So I think it's not just, up to journalists and the media to continue the conversation. It's up to all of us to continue to amplify these stories, to continue to talk about how it affects us and impacts our communities. And I think in that way, we can push people to talk about this. What we saw in the wake of the murder of George Floyd was Minneapolis rising up and taking to the streets in a very literal way, in a very traditional protest action. We saw that pop up all over the world. I'm sure many of you either participated in or saw protests in your own communities and cities. The media covered that because how could they not? We demanded it of them. We called attention to this egregious act of violence and demanded action. So I think it's ultimately up to us as individuals in this moment. And I think that goes back to the conversation about power. We believe at Color of Change about people power. No, we are not all lawmakers. We're not all presidents and so on. But together with collective action and collective power, we do have a voice that is far louder than any senator, any elected official. So that's kind of how I approach it.